Nobody warned Sloane Whitmore that the most important conversation of her life would happen in a hospital parking garage in the rain over a set of jumper cables she didn't know how to use. She had been a cardiovascular surgeon for 11 years. She had held hearts in her hands, literally the actual beating hearts of strangers, and she had not flinched. She had presented at conferences in Vancouver and Montreal and once, memorably, in Edinburgh, where she'd worn the wrong shoes and walked 12 blocks in the cold without caring. She had managed departments, hired and fired and restructured. She had done all of this without a single person in her life saying, "Sloane, you are going to fall apart in a parking garage in Thunder Bay, and it is going to change everything." It was the third week of November. The kind of November that Ontario does when it wants you to remember it exists. Not cold enough for proper snow, just wet and gray and insistent. Sloane had been on shift for 14 hours. She was still in her scrubs under her coat, her lanyard tucked inside her collar, and she was standing beside her car, her sensible, expensive, completely dead car, pressing the fob button like it might eventually agree with her. It did not agree with her. She had no jumper cables. She had roadside assistance, but her phone was at 6%, and the hold music had already played 43 seconds of something that sounded like it had been composed to make people give up. She was considering giving up, not just on the car, on the general concept of Thursday. That was when she heard the truck. It pulled into the space 2 down from hers, an older F-150, the dark green kind that had clearly been repainted at least once, with a small crack in the passenger mirror held together with electrical tape. The man who got out was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a canvas work jacket with the collar turned up against the rain. He had a reusable grocery bag in one hand and a child's backpack, bright orange, shaped like a fox, looped over his other arm. He noticed her immediately, not in the way that made her grip her keys, but in the way that people notice when something is wrong. He slowed his pace. "Dead battery," he said. "I think so," Sloane said. "The interior lights are on, but it won't turn over." He set the grocery bag down on the hood of his truck, gently, like it had eggs in it, which it did, and reached into the bed without being asked. He had cables. Of course he had cables. He was the kind of person who had cables. "I'm Nate," he said. "Nate Oduya. Sloane know how to do this." "That's okay," he said. "I do." He walked her through it anyway. Not because she needed to learn, she suspected, but because standing there watching felt rude. Red to red, black to black, black to ground. He explained it without condescension, just the plain facts, like he'd explained things before to people who needed to know them. The truck started. Then her car started. He disconnected the cables in the right order. "Let it run for 10 minutes before you turn it off again," he said, handing her back her keys. She hadn't realized she'd given them to him. "Thank you," she said. "I would have been standing here until—" She didn't finish the sentence. Until what? Until she called someone? She wasn't sure who she would have called. He nodded. He was already putting the cables back. He picked up his grocery bag. He was going to leave, and Sloane Whitmore, who had never in her professional life said anything she hadn't calculated first, said, "Do you want to have coffee sometime?" "I'd like to. I don't know." "Return the favor," somehow. He turned back around. He looked at her for a moment. Just a moment. Something passed over his face that she couldn't read. Not unkindness, not discomfort. Something older and more complicated than that. "I appreciate that," he said, "but I don't really." He stopped. Adjusted. "I have a daughter. My schedule's pretty specific." "Of course," she said. "I understand." He left. She sat in her running car and listened to the engine warm up and told herself that was the end of that. She saw him again 6 days later, which was the kind of thing that happened in a city the size of Thunder Bay, which is to say, not a city designed for convenient forgetting. He was at the farmer's market on a Saturday morning, the indoor one in the old arena on Balmoral, and he was crouched down beside a table of winter squash, and next to him was a girl, 7, maybe 8, with 2 uneven braids and a gap where her front teeth were growing in, and an expression of absolute seriousness about the squash selection. Sloane almost turned around. She was aware that the graceful thing was to not make this strange. She had 3 items on her list: honey, sourdough, the particular goat cheese from the farm up near Nipigon that her colleague had recommended. She could get all 3 without walking near the squash. She walked near the squash. "The butternut ones keep longer," she heard herself say. The girl looked up at her. Nate looked up at her. There was a half-second where everyone recalibrated. "Dr. Parking Garage," he said. "Just Sloane still," she said. The girl tugged on Nate's sleeve. "Do you know her?" "She helped me with something at work once," Nate said, which was not precisely accurate but was, Sloane thought, a generous reframing. "She helped you?" the girl said, with the particular tone of a child who has assessed the size difference between the two adults and found the story implausible. It was collaborative, Sloane said. The girl considered this. I'm Bea, she said. My dad said I could pick one squash and one only, but I think that's not enough squash. Bea, Nate said mildly. 2 squashes would be more efficient, Bea said, because then we have a backup. Backup for what? Sloane asked. In case the soup is bad and we need to make different soup. Sloane looked at Nate. Something pulled at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, the shape of one that had thought about it. She's not wrong, Sloane said. They bought 2 squashes. She didn't plan to see him again after that. She really didn't. She was not a person who engineered coincidences. She was a person who scheduled things and then executed them, and if something wasn't on the schedule, it generally did not happen. The farmer's market had been a fluke, a pleasant one, but a fluke. And yet, her hospital was across the street from the elementary school on Thun. She had never particularly noticed this before. She had walked that block hundreds of times and registered the school the way she registered most infrastructure, as background. The week after the farmer's market, she was walking out at 4:15 and she saw Nate standing at the gate. He was wearing the same canvas jacket. He had a thermos. He was reading something on his phone, but he looked up at exactly the right moment, the way people do when they're practiced at watching for something small and specific. A girl in a purple coat launched herself at his knees. He caught her without looking. One hand, thermos still in the other. He hugged her in that one-armed, automatic way of parents who have made this gesture 10,000 times. Bea said something that Sloane couldn't hear from across the street. He laughed. Sloane kept walking. She got home and ate leftovers standing at the kitchen counter and looked at her apartment, which was large and well-organized and full of things she had selected carefully, and thought, when did this start feeling like a waiting room? She didn't have an answer. She went to bed. She had a 7 a.m. surgery. She ran into him at the library, then at the gas station on Algoma, then at the pharmacy where he was in the cold and flu aisle with Bea, who had a red nose and the expression of someone who had opinions about being sick. Elderberry, Bea announced to Sloane by way of greeting. My dad says it probably doesn't work, but he's letting me get it because sometimes probably doesn't is enough. That's a reasonable philosophy, Sloane said. She's a doctor, Nate told Bea. She could tell you whether it works. Bea turned to Sloane with the full weight of her attention, which was considerable for a 7-year-old. Does it work? The evidence is mixed, Sloane said, but stress and sleep matter more than any supplement. So if believing in it helps you rest, then in a roundabout way. It works, Bea said. In a roundabout way, Sloane agreed. Bea put it in the basket with the satisfaction of someone who has won something. Nate looked at Sloane over his daughter's head. There was something that'd been decided against. Maybe more than once. She talks about you, he said quietly. After the market. She's remarkable, Sloane said, and meant it. A beat. The fluorescent lights of the pharmacy. The soundtrack of a store that was trying its best. There's a diner on Cumberland, he said. They do good coffee. Bea has swimming on Tuesdays at 5:30. I'm usually there from 5 until she's done. He said it like a fact, like a piece of information that she could do whatever she wanted with. He was already moving down the aisle. Bea, pulling him toward the vitamin C. Sloane stood there for a moment. She went on Tuesday. His name, the full version, was Nathaniel Kofi Oduya, and he had been born in Hamilton, Ontario. And he had moved to Thunder Bay 8 years ago for a job with the infrastructure crew working on the Nipigon Bridge reconstruction. He had stayed because by the time the contract ended, Bea existed, and uprooting her seemed wrong. He was a site foreman now. He owned his house. He coached minor hockey on Saturday mornings, the 6-year-olds, which he described as controlled chaos with too many helmets. His wife, Bea's mother, had died 4 years ago. He said it simply the way people say things they've had to say many times, the way it gets worn smooth by repetition until it sits flat in a sentence. Sloane did not push. She understood the shape of grief that had been managed rather than resolved. She told him about her own life in exchange, Edinburgh, the wrong shoes, the way she'd chosen cardiac surgery almost by accident, because the first time she saw an open-chest procedure she had felt inexplicably calm. She told him about her sister in Winnipeg who she called every Sunday and her mother in Kingston who sent care packages with too many granola bars and the particular silence of her apartment that she had for a long time called peace. And now, he asked. She looked at her coffee. Now I'm not sure what to call it. He nodded like he knew exactly what she meant, which she suspected he did. They stayed until the pool called he paid. She argued. He won mildly. They walked out into the Tuesday evening, which had gotten colder while they weren't looking, and he said, "Same time next week?" and she said yes before she'd finished deciding. The Tuesdays accumulated. 3, then 5, then 8. Sloane was not a person who accumulated things carelessly. She was precise, deliberate, unsentimental about arrangements that were not working. She had ended 2 long-term relationships in her 30s with the clarity of someone who had done the math and found the answer. She knew herself. She did not entirely know what this was. Nate was easy to be with in a way that surprised her. Not uncomplicated, she didn't think he was simple, had never thought that, but easy the way a well-built thing is easy to use. He said what he meant. He asked questions and waited for answers. He noticed things. When her coffee was empty, when she was working through something she hadn't said yet, when Bea needed to be redirected before the redirection became necessary. Bea started joining them sometimes at the end of swim, still with wet-combed hair and a bag of chips from the vending machine, installing herself next to Sloane with the proprietary ease of a child who has decided something without consulting anyone. "You should come to our house for dinner," Bea told Sloane one Tuesday, approximately 3 minutes in eating her chips. "B," Nate said. "We make good soup," Bea said. "We have backup squash." Sloane laughed before she could help it. Nate looked at Sloane, and there was something in his eyes that she recognized because it was the same thing she'd been doing for weeks. The careful calculus of wanting something and being afraid of what wanting it meant. "You're welcome to," he said quietly. "If you want." She came on a Friday. He made soup, the butternut kind, from scratch with a sourdough loaf from the same market where she'd first met Bea. The kitchen was warm and slightly chaotic, and the table had a math worksheet on one corner that nobody moved. Bea narrated most of dinner. Sloane did dishes while Nate put Bea to bed, and she listened to the sounds of it, the routine, the slight negotiations, the specific firmness of a parent who knows exactly when to hold a line. And she thought, this is what I've been standing outside of. This warmth, this particular kind of ordinary. When he came back downstairs, she was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea she'd found by opening 3 wrong cupboards. "Sorry about the drama of the bedtime routine," he said. "I liked it," she said. He sat down. There was a quiet between them that was not uncomfortable. Outside, the first real snow of the season was starting to come down in, the actual kind, the kind that stayed. "Nate," she said. He looked at her. "I'm not good at this," she said. "I want to be clear about that up front. I'm very good at most things, and I am genuinely not good at this." "At what?" he said, though she thought he probably knew. "At not knowing what's next," she said, "at being in the middle of something and not having a plan for it, at—" She stopped, tried again. "I like you. I like Bea. And I'm not saying that to put you in a difficult position. I'm saying it because I think you should know, because I think you've been careful with me, and I don't want you to be careful on a wrong assumption." He was quiet for a moment. "What's the right assumption?" he asked. "That I'm not going anywhere," she said. "Unless you want me to." At his tea. At something only he could see. "She asks about you," he said finally, "every day. She asks if we're going to see you." He paused. "I've been telling her you're busy." "I'm not busy on Fridays," Sloane said. Something moved across his face. Something that had been held very still for a very long time. "My wife's name was Daisy," he said. It was not a non sequitur. Sloane understood that he was giving her something, the name, the weight of it, the fact of it. She was a good person. She was a really good person. "I know," Sloane said quietly. "I don't want to." He stopped. "Started again. I've been afraid. I want to say that plainly, because I think you're the kind of person who prefers things plain. I've been afraid that wanting something again means I'm losing her, the memory of her." "I don't think that's how it works," Sloane said carefully. "I think the people we've loved, they don't get smaller to make room. I think we just get bigger." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's a good way to put it," he said. "I had a lot of Tuesdays to think about what I wanted to say," she admitted. That got a real laugh out of him. The first fully unguarded one she'd heard. It changed his whole face. Bea found out about them on a Sunday morning in January, which is to say, she deduces it with the particular investigative energy of a child who pays very close attention. She had come downstairs to find Sloane at the kitchen table with coffee, which Sloane had made herself because she now knew which cupboard. And her father was there too, and they were talking in the quiet, easy way of 2 people who had been talking for a long time. Bea stood in the doorway in her socks. She looked at her father. She looked at Sloane. She looked at her father again. "Is this a morning thing now?" she said. "Like a regular morning thing?" Nate looked at Sloane. Sloane looked at Nate. "It might be," Nate said, "if that's okay with you." Bea thought about it with the gravity it deserved. "Will you still come to the farmer's market?" she asked Sloane. "Because we need someone who knows about squash." "I know very little about squash," Sloane said. "You're the expert. I was bluffing." Bea stared at her. The butternut thing was a bluff? I read it off a sign. Bea started laughing, the kind that bent her over slightly, and then she climbed up onto the chair beside Sloane, pulled the toast that was sitting in the middle of the table to her side, and started eating it like the matter was fully settled, which, in most of the ways that mattered, it was. Here is the thing about Thunder Bay in February, which Sloane had never fully appreciated until this particular February. It is one of those places that demands something from you. The cold is not decorative. The landscape is not trying to be charming. The lake sits there in its enormity, frozen at the edges, dark in the middle, indifferent to whether you appreciate it. You either become the kind of person it takes to live there, or you leave. Sloane had been living there for 11 years, and she had never quite become that person. She had been efficient in it. She had been successful in it. She had never let it in. She was starting to let it in. They went skating on a Sunday, the outdoor rink at Chapels Park, and Bea held both their hands and demanded they lift her over the rough patches. And Nate was not a graceful skater, but he was a steady one, which Sloane was coming to understand was the truest thing about him. Steady, present. Not glamorous, he would be the first to say so, but there. She had spent 11 years surrounded by people who were very impressive and often absent. She had not realized until now how much she had been compensating for the absence by doubling down on the impressive. She called her sister that night from her apartment, which she still had, though she was spending less time in it. "You sound different," her sister said. "Different how?" "Slower," her sister said. "Like you're not already thinking about the next thing." Sloane stood at her window and looked at the snow. "I'm not," she said. "I'm thinking about this thing, just this one." In March, Bea had a part in the school play. She was, specifically, a talking maple tree with 2 speaking lines and strong opinions about her costume. Nate sat in the 3rd row. Sloane sat beside him. When Bea walked out in her brown and green construction paper, she scanned the audience with professional efficiency, and when she found them, both of them, together, 3rd row, something happened to her face. Not surprise. More like confirmation. She delivered her 2 lines with great seriousness. The audience applauded. Afterward, in the gym, Bea ate approximately 9 squares of the sheet cake that parents had brought and explained to Sloane at length the creative decisions behind the cup costume. Nate stood nearby, talking to another parent, and every few moments he'd look over and his eyes would find Sloane, and there was something in that, the ease of it, the not having to think about it, that hit her somewhere under the sternum. She had held hearts in her hands. She knew what they were made of. Muscle, mostly. Electrical signal. 4 chambers with very specific jobs. She had not expected hers to have anything left to learn. On an evening in late March, when the snow was finally relenting and the light was staying longer, Nate and Sloane were sitting on his back porch with tea, Bea asleep inside, the city quieter than it ever let itself be in daylight. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want you to know you can say whatever you actually think, because I'd rather have the real answer than the comfortable one." "Always," she said. He looked at the yard. "Are you happy?" She thought about it. Really thought about it, the way she thought about hard things, with the same attention she gave to decisions that mattered. She thought about the Tuesday coffees and the Friday soups and Bea's theories about backup squash and her apartment that still existed, but felt less like hers every week. She thought about the skating rink and her sister saying slower and the school play in the 3rd row. "Yes," she said. It came out without effort. "I think I forgot what it felt like, and I've been relearning it." He nodded slowly. "Me too," he said. "And then, I wasn't going to say this yet. I had a timeline. You would appreciate that, the timeline." "I appreciate timelines," she confirmed, "but I think—" He stopped. Tried again. The way she'd come to recognize. His way of making sure he said the true thing rather than the easy one. "I think a Daisy would have liked you. I think she would have been glad. And I've been waiting to feel like I could say that, and I feel like I can now." Sloane set down her tea. She had not cried in a parking garage over her dead battery. She had not cried at the farmer's market or at the pharmacy or over 11 Tuesdays or 1 Friday or a school play. She had held herself, as she always did, with the composure of someone who had learned early that composure was a survival skill. She cried, now, quietly, not sadly. He put his arm around her and she leaned into it, and they sat there while the last of the winter held on to itself, knowing it was almost done. The following Saturday, Bea decided, unprompted, that Sloane should learn to make soup. "You're here enough," Bea said, as if this were obvious. "You should know how." "She's not wrong," Nate said from the couch, not looking up from his book. So Sloane stood in the kitchen with a 7-year-old instructor who had very specific opinions about the order of the vegetables and the right amount of cumin. And she followed directions, and she made soup that was not quite right but was almost right. And Bea tasted it and said, with the fairness of a good teacher, "It's a good first try. High praise," Nate said. "It is," Bea said. "I don't give medium praise. That doesn't help anyone." Sloane looked around the kitchen, at the math worksheet still on the corner of the table, at the crayon drawings held to the fridge with too many magnets, at the man reading on the couch and the girl explaining cumin ratios with a wooden spoon, at the snow outside finally thinning, the birch trees showing through, at all of it. This, she thought, is what I was building toward, without knowing I was building. Without knowing there was a toward. She stirred the soup. It wasn't perfect, it was exactly enough.